After my husband's funeral, my son drove me down a remote road and said, "This is where you get off." He didn't look at me when he said it. His hands stayed firmly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed ahead like I was just another errand to be dropped. Off. The air was dry, the sun starting to lower behind a long stretch of trees, and for a second I thought he was joking. But then he parked the car on the side of the dirt road, got out, opened my door, and pulled my suitcase from the trunk. He placed it on the gravel like it was a bag of groceries. Not even a goodbye. Kevin. I finally spoke, unsure if my voice would even reach him. My legs weren't moving. My heart was pounding in my ears. "What are you doing?" "You'll figure it out," he said. "You said you needed space after Dad passed, so here it is. Hold on a moment before we move forward. Let us know where in the world you're watching from. And if you're loving these stories, don't forget to hit subscribe. Tomorrow's episode is going to be absolutely mind-blowing." That wasn't what I'd said. I had asked for a few days to grieve, maybe some quiet. What I didn't ask for was to be dumped in the middle of nowhere, without so much as a motel in sight. But Kevin was already back in the driver's seat, shutting the door, putting the car into drive. "Kevin, where am I supposed to go?" He rolled down the window just an inch. "I don't know. You'll manage. You always do." Then he was gone. The red taillights disappeared behind a cloud of dust. I stood there, 67 years old, in a black dress, clutching the strap of my purse and trying to understand what had just happened. I waited. Maybe he'd come back, realize what he had done. He didn't. Eventually, I started walking. My legs ached. My shoes were not made for gravel, but I kept going until I saw a gas station light flickering in the distance. I used their phone to call a cab. I didn't even know where to tell the driver to take me. My house wasn't mine anymore. Because Kevin had already moved in. 2 days earlier, just after the funeral service, I returned to the home I shared with my husband Richard for over 35 years. The door was unlocked. Inside, I found Kevin's wife Julie rearranging the living room, barking orders to a man carrying a new couch. "You're just in time to help with the boxes," she said, like I was a guest showing up to a party I hadn't been invited to. "Julie, what's going on?" Kevin appeared from the kitchen holding a clipboard. "Mom, we thought it'd be easier to get a head start. You said you'd be staying with Aunt Clara for a while, right?" I didn't remember saying that. I remembered saying I needed time. I remembered saying I wasn't sure what I wanted to do next. And I remembered Julie nodding along, looking polite, but distracted, like she was already measuring the drapes. "You moved in?" I asked. "Dad wanted us to have the house," Kevin said casually. "You always said you weren't attached to material things." I stared at him, stunned. "Your father left the house to both of us in his will." Kevin smirked. "Yeah, well, I handled the paperwork. It's done." He made it sound like it was settled. But I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been given time to read anything. I hadn't even seen a final version of the will. That night, I stayed in the guest room. I couldn't sleep. I heard Julie laughing downstairs, talking on the phone about the kitchen renovation. Kevin wanted to knock down the wall to make an open-concept living space. The next morning, he offered to drive me to Clara's house. "Let's make it easy," he said. I didn't realize he meant, "Let's leave you by the side of a dirt road." I ended up staying in a small room above a laundromat. The owner, Teresa, was kind enough to let me pay by the week. I spent my days at the library nearby, trying to get my hands on anything related to Richard's estate. But I hit wall after wall. Kevin had already filed everything. The lawyer he used was a friend of his from college. My name barely appeared anywhere. Felt humiliated, not just by Kevin's betrayal, but by the fact that I had never seen it coming. He had always been cold, but I chalked that up to stress. Julie was always sharp-tongued, but I thought she was just tired, overwhelmed with the kids. I blamed everything on temporary emotions. Now I realized it had been intentional, planned. I tried calling Clara, but she was out of town with her daughter. I restored the home to something that felt livable again. Every change I made was a message to myself. I'm not waiting anymore. Around the holidays, I invited 2 old friends from church for dinner. It was the first time I'd had company in over a year. We ate roast chicken and talked about nothing in particular. I didn't bring up Kevin. They didn't ask. At the end of the night, one of them, Linda, stood at the door and said, "I'm glad you're doing better." I didn't pretend to be okay. I just nodded. "I'm doing something," I said. "That's enough." In January, I started volunteering at the local community center, just a few mornings a week, filing papers, organizing pantry supplies, helping with mailers, nothing heavy. I didn't tell anyone there what had happened with my son. No one needed to know. I wasn't looking for sympathy. I was just looking to do something that mattered to someone, and that's what I did. One of the other volunteers, Marcia, a retired school teacher, invited me for coffee a few weeks later. We sat at her kitchen table, talked about old movies, and shared stories about our husbands. Hers passed in 2014. We didn't talk about grief in dramatic terms, just quietly. Like people who had lived through it and didn't need to prove it. She asked me once, "Do you have children?" I looked at my hands and said, "I used to." She didn't press, and I was grateful. By March, I was back in the garden. The hydrangeas had survived barely. I cut them back hard, bought new soil, planted fresh perennials, replaced the cracked pavers near the steps with new ones. The yard began to look like something again. Not what it was before, but not ruined either. Just different. Still mine. Spring brought small things, the kind you don't notice unless you've lived through a year of being erased, a good night's sleep, a quiet cup of coffee, an unexpected laugh. I began to answer the phone again. Replied to messages from friends I hadn't spoken to in months. One of them, Joanne, said, "I wasn't sure if you were still in town." I was. I just hadn't been ready. I never heard from Kevin again. No calls, no letters, no updates, as out. Per the no contact order, he was not allowed to reach out, and he didn't. Whether that was respect or avoidance, I'll never know. But I was fine with it. He was gone, and I didn't miss him. One morning in April, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and read the newspaper. No drama, no legal updates, no headlines about wills or courtrooms or settlements, just the weather, community news, a notice about a library fundraiser. I cut it out, pinned it to the corkboard in the kitchen. Maybe I'd go. Maybe I wouldn't. But either way, it was my choice, and that was the point. The house is quiet now, but it's not empty. It's mine, completely, and no one, not my son, not his wife, not any legal technicality, can take that away again. Not ever. And I didn't need to hate him to never let him back in. The last week of October, Lisa called with an update. Kevin's lawyer reached out. They want to settle. Quietly. Settle what? I asked. He'll plead guilty. No jail time, but full restitution, public apology, surrender of any future claim to the estate, and a no-contact agreement. If you agree, it's done. I sat with that for a long time. Does he have any money? No. But Julie agreed to split part of the remaining assets she received during the divorce. It's not much, but it's something. I nodded. Okay. Okay to the agreement? Yes. Lisa paused. Are you sure? I'm sure. The public apology was delivered via court transcript. It was short, flat, read by his attorney. I acknowledge that I acted without legal standing and caused harm to my mother. I take full responsibility for submitting documents that were not verified. I relinquish any future interest in the estate and apologize for my actions. There was no signature, just a statement for the record. But it was enough. For the first time in over a year, I slept through the night. Not because justice was perfect, or because everything was fixed, but because I knew Kevin couldn't touch anything anymore. Not the house, not the memories, not me. The house felt different now, not because anything had changed dramatically. The wallpaper was still old in the hallway. The kitchen faucet still dripped occasionally. But the air inside was finally clean, free of tension, of that invisible weight that had been pressing on my shoulders for over a year. I had finished the legal battle. Kevin had agreed to the settlement. The judge signed off on the no-contact agreement. I wouldn't hear from him again unless he violated it, which Lisa assured me would trigger immediate consequences. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the door closed. And it finally was. The morning after the settlement was finalized, I opened the windows of the house. I went room by room, letting in the fresh air. It was cool outside, early November. The smell of leaves and dry earth drifted in. I sat on the floor in the living room, folded the last of the legal documents into a file, and placed them in the back of the cabinet with the rest of the records. I wasn't going to look at them again. That afternoon, I walked to the backyard and stood under the old tree where Richard used to read on Sunday afternoons. The grass had grown uneven. A section of the fence needed replacing. But it was my yard again. No one was going to change the locks. No one was going to tape notices to the door. No one was going to remove me from it. The silence wasn't lonely anymore. It was just silence, and I was finally ready to enjoy it. 2 weeks later, I donated Kevin's remaining items. He hadn't asked for them back. I had no obligation to keep them. A few sweaters, some trophies from high school debate, a stack of DVDs still in a box in the garage. I dropped them off at the donation center in town, signed the slip, and walked away without looking back. I didn't keep a single thing. I was done pretending he was coming back. Around Thanksgiving, I received a letter from Julie, typed, short, unsigned. Barbara, I heard the settlement was finalized. I know there's nothing I can say that will undo what happened. I just want you to know I don't plan to interfere anymore. I've moved out of state. I won't be involved in any way with what's yours, and I understand that I have no place in your life. That's fair. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I read it once and threw it out. I didn't keep it for closure. It didn't give me any, but it didn't upset me either. She was gone, like Kevin, like the storm they had brought into my life, and I was still here. The court required Kevin to issue financial restitution, as agreed. He didn't have enough liquid assets, so the payment came in the form of a forced property sale, a small investment he and Julie had made before their divorce. Lisa managed the paperwork. In December, I received the full amount in my account, $38,000. Not a fortune, but a statement, a legally enforced one. I used a portion to repair the house, the roof, the electrical system, a new water heater. I hired a local crew, good people, professional. They didn't know the history of the house, and I didn't explain it. I just let them do the work. Room by room. That weekend, I ran into Julie. It happened at the grocery store, of all places. I turned into the dairy aisle, and there she was, holding a basket and staring blankly at a wall of butter. She looked smaller than I remembered, tired, no makeup. Hair tied back. Her clothes were simple, unlike the curated image she always projected when she and Kevin lived in my house. She saw me before I had time to turn around. We locked eyes. For a second, she looked like she might walk away, but she didn't. She took one cautious step forward. "Barbara," she said. I didn't answer. "I didn't know," she added quickly. "About the will. Kevin handled all of that. I waited. I swear," she continued. "He told me your husband left the house to him, that it was settled before the funeral. He said you agreed." I raised an eyebrow. "And you believed that?" Her face twitched. "He was my husband. That never stopped you from questioning other people." Julie's lips tightened. "I didn't sign anything. I didn't touch the documents. I stayed out of it." I stepped closer. "But you stayed in my house, slept in my bed, painted the kitchen, tore up the garden, rearranged everything. You didn't ask questions because you didn't want answers." She didn't deny it. She looked down at her hands. "We're divorced now. He begged me to help him with the case, to vouch for him, Say it was all just a mistake. I said no. I said nothing. Julie added, "He's not doing well. He's isolated. His job let him go after the news came out. His name's been passed around local firms as a risk. So now you want sympathy?" "No," she said quickly. "I don't want anything. I wanted you to know. I made mistakes. I know that, but I didn't forge that will, and I didn't leave you on that road." She turned to walk away, then paused. "You were right not to forget. I wouldn't have. I didn't tell Lisa about the grocery store meeting. There was no point. Julie wasn't on trial, and I didn't believe for a second she was innocent. She hadn't signed anything, but she'd benefited. She'd walked into that house, claimed it as hers, and acted like I was the guest. But now she was out. Kevin was alone, and for the first time, the narrative wasn't his to control. The hearing came sooner than expected. The DA's office pushed for a plea agreement, but Kevin refused. He insisted on defending himself in court, against advice. The hearing was procedural. It wasn't the full trial, but it was enough. The judge reviewed evidence for over an hour. Kevin sat there, pale and stiff, avoiding eye contact. His attorney tried to minimize it all, called it a regrettable family misunderstanding. He leaned heavily on the grief defense, claimed that Kevin was acting on emotions, not criminal intent. Then the prosecutor stood. She didn't yell. She didn't accuse. She simply read dates. The date Richard died. The date the new will was submitted. The date Kevin changed the locks. The date I was left by the road. And finally, the date the original will was recovered, with proof of witness signatures and notarization, written 8 months before Richard's death. The prosecutor paused, then said, "This wasn't a mistake. This was a choice. A deliberate, documented, and coordinated effort to remove a legal beneficiary from her home." The judge looked at Kevin. He didn't flinch. The judge scheduled the next session for early November. Full trial, public record, witnesses. Lisa leaned over and whispered, "He thought this would go away. Now it's not going anywhere." I replied. That night, I found the last box in the attic. It was one of Richard's old toolboxes, taped shut and shoved behind holiday decorations. Inside were a few odds and ends, wire cutters, screws, a flashlight that no longer worked. But beneath it all was a small sealed envelope, my name again. Inside was a photograph, just one. It was Kevin, 7 or 8 years old. He was standing in the backyard holding a fish he'd caught with Richard on a summer weekend. He was smiling so wide I could almost hear him laughing. On the back of the photo, Richard had written, "No matter what happens later, remember he was once this boy." I stared at that handwriting for a long time. Then I placed the photo back in the envelope and stored it in the drawer. Not as a symbol of forgiveness, but because even if I couldn't forget what Kevin had done as a man, I could remember who he had been as a child. The original will, the emails from Richard's planner, the statements Kevin made during the first hearing. I nodded slowly. What kind of sentence are we talking about? Hard to say. It'll probably start with probation, a fine. But if they find he altered any other documents, it could escalate. Part of me wanted to say drop it, that this was enough, that I didn't want to be part of dragging my son into the criminal system. But then I remembered that dirt road, that suitcase, the way Kevin drove off without looking back, the months I spent sleeping above a laundromat while he lived in my house and pretended I never existed. "Let them proceed," I said. Lisa paused, then said, "Good, that's the right call." The case became local news, but only briefly. A small article appeared in the county paper. Man accused of filing fraudulent will in dispute over family estate. It didn't name me, just referred to me as the surviving spouse. That was enough. Old neighbors stopped me at the grocery store. One woman brought over cookies and said, "I always knew you were the one holding that family together." I didn't argue. The only person I didn't hear from was Kevin. He had gone silent again. No calls, no texts. I assumed he had left town. Maybe to avoid embarrassment, maybe to delay the inevitable court summons. Either way, I didn't care, but it wasn't over. Not quite. One morning, I opened the front door and found a small box on the porch. No label. No note. Inside were a few of Richard's things I hadn't seen since before the funeral. His cufflinks, his old watch, a tie I had given him on his 60th birthday, and a worn leather notebook. I recognized Kevin's handwriting on the folded receipt that held them in place. These belonged to him. Thought you'd want them. I didn't. I didn't know what to do with the box at first. Part of me wanted to toss it, but I didn't. Instead, I took the items out one by one, wiped the watch clean, hung the tie in the closet, placed the cufflinks in the jewelry box where they used to be. The notebook, though, I opened it. It wasn't Richard's writing. It was mine. It was a journal I had kept years ago, tucked away in the office drawer. Kevin had taken it. Or Julie had. They'd read it. Inside were entries I barely remembered writing, notes about Richard's illness, doubts about Kevin's behavior, fears about growing old in a house that no longer felt safe. I sat on the floor and read every page, and then I closed it and put it away. Kevin had tried to erase me, but in the end, he gave back one of the few pieces of myself I had forgotten I left behind. That night, I went outside, stood on the porch, and looked at the sky. No one was watching. There was no audience, just me, the house, the wind, and the sound of my breath. Kevin might never apologize. He might never admit what he did. But that didn't matter anymore. He didn't win. He thought taking the house would silence me, but I was still here, and he was gone. The court date was set for October. Until then, everything moved slowly. The district attorney's office was methodical, quiet, but consistent. Lisa kept me updated, though there was little to do on my end except wait. The prosecutor didn't need additional testimony from me yet. They had what they needed: documents, bank records, 2 notarized statements, and a timeline that left no space for coincidence. Kevin had forged the will. He had filed it days after the funeral. His name was on every submission. His email address was tied to the digital paperwork. Even if his attorney argued that he'd been misinformed or rushed, it wouldn't matter. The evidence didn't care about his explanations. Still, the silence between that moment and the courtroom felt heavy. Then one morning, Lisa called. Her voice was sharper than usual. "You're not going to like this," she said. I braced myself. What now? Kevin's trying to claim diminished responsibility. He submitted a statement to the court saying he was under psychological distress due to grief and couldn't process decisions clearly. I didn't speak. She continued. He's also blaming Julie. Says she handled most of the documents, that she pushed him to file quickly so they wouldn't lose their chance at securing the house. Now I spoke. He's throwing her under the bus. Looks that way, Lisa said. It won't work, but it tells me something. What? He's desperate, and he's alone. But he had returned the papers. That was enough. For now. I thought that once the house was back in my name and Kevin had handed over those final documents, things would quiet down. I expected silence, distance, maybe even some form of acceptance that we were never going to return to anything that resembled a mother and son relationship. But I was wrong. The fallout came slowly at first. Small things. A phone call from a former neighbor who used to wave at me from across the fence. I didn't know all that had happened, she said. Kevin made it sound like you were downsizing, that it was all your choice. I didn't bother explaining. It wasn't her fault, she had only heard his version. People believe the story that's most convenient. But her call was just the beginning. The next week, Lisa forwarded me a letter from the State Probate Commission. They had launched a preliminary ethics review into the fraudulent will Kevin had submitted. This is serious, she said over the phone. The court flagged it themselves. You didn't even have to report him. Will there be charges? There could be, especially now that we have the original will and Kevin's own admission that he filed the other version without notifying you. And he's no longer cooperating. He shut down communication again. I said nothing. Barbara? Lisa's voice softened just slightly. This isn't just about restitution anymore. This is about accountability. I hung up and sat with that word for a long time. Accountability. Kevin had lived most of his life without facing it. He failed out of college twice. Julie's parents paid off one of his credit card debts years ago, and Richard quietly covered another. Every time he messed up, someone cleaned it up for him. Usually Richard, sometimes me. We called it support, but now I could see it clearly for what it had been, enabling. And now the people who had always stood between Kevin and the consequences of his behavior were gone. Richard was gone, and I was done. It took 3 more weeks before Kevin reached out again. This time, it was a voicemail. His tone wasn't angry or defensive. It was flat. Tired. "Hi, Mom. I heard about the commission. I know you didn't file it, but they think you did. Everyone does. Look, I know I screwed up. I get it. I don't want this to follow me forever. Can we talk?" I didn't call back. He sent 2 more voicemails, then a text. "Julie filed for divorce." That one I stared at for a long time. I didn't feel satisfaction. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt numb. They had always seemed like a team, a cold, transactional team, but still aligned. If Julie had finally had enough, it meant something had shifted. Or maybe she saw what was coming. Maybe the threat of Kevin being investigated had made her realize he wasn't worth the trouble. The truth is, I didn't care. I had spent too long, wrapped up in what Kevin and Julie thought, what they said, how they painted me to others. I had wasted years believing that keeping the peace was the same thing as being respected. But peace built on fear or silence isn't peace, it's surrender. A month later, I had my first real morning of calm. I woke up early, not because of anxiety, but because the light coming through the bedroom window was soft and pleasant. I made coffee, walked into the yard and stood barefoot in the grass. Richard's garden was a mess. I hadn't touched it since I returned, but it was still there. The hydrangeas needed pruning, the soil was dry, but the roots had survived. So, had I spent the next few days outside? I cleaned out the flower beds, called a landscaper to help fix the sprinkler system Kevin had apparently damaged trying to install some modern irrigation system that never worked. I started leaving the back door open during the day, letting fresh air run through the house. It felt like something was shifting, slowly. But for the first time, the house felt like it belonged to me again. Not because of legal papers, but because I was caring for it again. Because I was living in it. Then came the envelope. It was from the district attorney's office. Lisa called before I even had a chance to open it. "They've decided to move forward with charges," she said. "Forgery, falsifying legal documents, fraud, against Kevin?" "Yes." I sat down. "Do they need me to testify?" "Eventually. But for now, they're just compiling evidence. Your financial records." The yard still had the same creaky fence. The tree with the birdhouse Richard built. The house was mine again, but the damage had been done. 3 days later, the first envelope arrived. It was from Kevin's attorney. A formal request for negotiated division of remaining personal items and amicable discussion of asset reallocation. I passed it to Lisa, who rolled her eyes. "He doesn't have a case," she said. "He's trying to wear you down. Then let him try." Over the next month, I began putting the house back together. Slowly. Room by room. I cleaned the baseboards myself, replaced the locks, took down the smart thermostat Kevin had installed and reinstalled the old manual one Richard had liked. I washed the curtains, scrubbed the grout in the kitchen floor, and patched the scuffed wall by the hallway. I wasn't restoring the house to make it feel the same. I was erasing them from it. One afternoon, while going through the garage, I found an unopened bin labeled Office Dad. It was duct-taped shut and shoved behind a pile of discarded drywall. Inside were several folders of Richard's old papers, a few of his golf trophies, and something I hadn't seen in years, his handwritten notes from the trust discussions we'd had right after his heart attack. At the bottom of the bin was a small envelope addressed to me. It wasn't dramatic. No letterhead. No wax seal. Just my name, written in Richard's thick, slanted handwriting. I opened it carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "If you're reading this, it's because I couldn't protect you the way I planned. I hope You're not surprised. I know Kevin's charm wears thin, but I trusted you to stand your ground, because no one else ever has. You always thought you were the soft one, Barb, but I knew better. You don't break. I sat in the garage, reading that sentence over and over. You don't break. 2 weeks later, Kevin showed up. He didn't call, didn't text, just parked on the curb and walked up the driveway. I saw him through the front window wearing a polo shirt and holding something under his arm. A folder, maybe. His expression was stiff, unreadable. I opened the door but didn't invite him in. He stood on the porch. Can we talk? I crossed my arms. What do you want, Kevin? His eyes shifted. You didn't answer my lawyer. Because your lawyer's wasting time. I want to settle this, he said. I don't want this to get ugly. I stared at him. You threw me out of my home after Dad's funeral. You filed fake paperwork and tried to make me disappear. You dragged me through court for something. That was mine. And now you're worried about things getting ugly? He didn't respond. I let the silence hang. He finally cleared his throat. Julie and I are separated. That's unfortunate. She said I went too far. You did. He looked down at the porch boards. I don't know what you want from me, Mom. I didn't answer right away. Then I said, I don't want anything from you, Kevin. That's what you never understood. I didn't fight you for money or the house. I fought because you thought you could take everything and I'd just disappear. He looked up. I was angry. After Dad died, don't. I cut him off. Don't hide behind grief. We're all grieving. You made choices, and now you live with them. He stood there for a long second, then placed the folder down on the porch bench. These are the rest of the documents, financial records, copies of what we changed. You can give them to your lawyer. I'm not fighting anymore. Then he turned around and walked back to his car. He didn't look back. I brought the folder to Lisa the next morning. She flipped through it, noting dates and inconsistencies. This will help close the loop, she said. He's admitting to more than he realizes. I nodded. Good. Do you want to pursue charges? I thought about it. Then I shook my head. No, I don't want more noise. Lisa hesitated, then said, It's your call. Just know he walked into something serious. Forging a will isn't just civil fraud. It's criminal. I know. I left her office and didn't look back. That evening, I opened every window. In the house, let the spring air run through each room. I played the radio softly, made myself a cup of tea, and sat in the armchair that used to be Richard's. I looked around. The place was quiet, clean, mine again. Kevin hadn't apologized. Not really, and I didn't expect him to. He even suggested that I might have pressured Richard in his final months. Then Lisa stood up, and piece by piece, she dismantled it all. Emails, bank records, statements from Richard's financial advisor confirming his mental clarity, maintenance, invoices, every single item with my name on it. Then came the will, signed, initialed, witnessed, dated 8 months before Richard passed, legally binding. Lisa finished calmly. This will supersede any undocumented revision. My client was removed from her home without consent, without due process, and in direct contradiction to her late husband's stated intentions. The judge took a long pause. Then he leaned forward. This court sees no reason to dismiss the original will. My heart skipped. The property in question is to be returned to Barbara Whitaker immediately. Kevin didn't move. He stared ahead, frozen. Lisa closed her binder and leaned toward me. It's done, but it wasn't over. Not for Kevin, because the court also ordered a formal review of how the newer will had been submitted, without proper witness signatures filed in haste with documents that might have been altered, a review that could lead to criminal charges. I stood, grabbed my coat, and walked out without a word. Outside, the sun was warm on my face. It was the first time in weeks I didn't feel like I was being buried by something I couldn't control. I had taken it back. Now, all that remained was deciding what to do with it. The house didn't look the same when I returned. It had only been a few weeks, but everything felt different. Julie's patio furniture was gone. The porch plants I had raised from cuttings were either dried out or replaced by something artificial. The flag Richard used to hang every Memorial Day was missing. There was a security camera by the door that hadn't been there before. Kevin had already packed most of their belongings by the time I arrived. He wasn't home. I wasn't sure if I preferred it that way or not. Julie had left a box on the porch labeled Barbara Misk. Inside were a few items she probably thought would keep me from complaining. A stained table runner, some baking pans I hadn't used in years, a broken clock that Richard and I had bought at a yard sale in 1986. Not included? Any of the things. That actually mattered. I didn't bother knocking. The house was legally mine again. I turned the key and stepped inside. The scent hit me first. Lemon cleaner and paint. Not the usual scent of old pine and the faint trace of Richard's cologne that used to linger near the hallway. The furniture had been rearranged. Kevin's giant sectional was still in the living room, covering the hardwood floors Richard spent 2 weekends refinishing with his own hands. There were scuff marks on the walls, a crack in the corner by the fireplace, and a nail sticking out from the baseboard near the stairs. The place had been lived in hard. I walked upstairs slowly. My bedroom, our bedroom, was stripped. The closet had been emptied, but a broken hanger still hung from one of the racks. There were chips on the dresser I'd kept spotless for 30 years. One of my favorite framed photographs, a beach trip Richard and I had taken when Kevin was 12, was gone. Later that afternoon, Lisa called to confirm that the court had issued an enforcement order to ensure Kevin vacated fully. He'd been served a notice to leave the property within 72 hours and had complied, but not without protest. "He says you poisoned Dad against him," Lisa said flatly. "Did the judge believe him?" She laughed once. "No, not even a little. I didn't say anything right away. I just stared at the empty kitchen where Richard used to stand in the mornings making scrambled eggs. He always added too much salt. I'd tease him about it. He'd grin and do it anyway. Barbara," Lisa added, "I don't think this is over for Kevin. His lawyers made some noise about appealing. I don't think it'll go far, but you need to be ready." I was. I just hadn't expected the silence. For weeks I had been fueled by stress and anger, chasing papers, reading depositions, showing up to hearings. But now that the judge had ruled and Kevin was gone, I was left with nothing but empty rooms and a deep, exhausting quiet. No apology, no phone call, no message from Kevin, nothing. Julie had texted me a week earlier, just 2 words. "You won." That was it. I sat on the edge of the bed that night, staring out the window. "Says he's under instruction not to disclose anything about the will." "Instruction from who?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Kevin." My stomach sank. "He's either trying to stall us," Lisa said, "or there's something in that will that would end this entire case, and he knows it." That same day, Lisa filed a petition with the probate court requesting a formal review of the estate proceedings. Kevin would be served notice within 48 hours. Whether he liked it or not, this was going to court. 2 days later, I walked past the home I used to live in. I hadn't been back since the day Kevin left me on that dirt road, but something told me I needed to see it with my own eyes. The shutters had been repainted. Julie's car was in the driveway. There were new patio chairs on the porch, a fresh coat of gray over the siding Richard and I had picked out together 15 years earlier. I stood across the street, just watching. Then the front door opened. Julie stepped out, holding a phone to her ear, laughing. She didn't notice me. I couldn't hear her conversation, but the way she moved, confident, comfortable, it was like she had always belonged there. She turned and called into the house. "Kevin, they're coming by next Thursday to look at the floors." Then she stepped back inside. I froze. They were planning renovations. In their minds, the house was theirs already. They had no intention of stopping. Back at Lisa's office, things were moving fast. Kevin had responded to the petition by hiring an attorney of his own, a man named Brian Cutler. I recognized the name. He was aggressive, expensive, and had a reputation for dragging cases out until the other side gave up. Lisa wasn't fazed. "Let him drag it," she said. "Every time he delays, it looks worse for him." Then something shifted. 3 days after the petition was filed, we received a surprise notice. Sampson, the original estate attorney, had suddenly found a copy of Richard's previous will in his personal archives. It had been misfiled, he said. Complete coincidence. Lisa wasn't buying it. He was protecting himself, she muttered as she read the document. Because if we had subpoenaed everything and this came out later, he'd be complicit. She handed it to me. It was Richard's signature, his handwriting, his initials on every page. The will named me as co-owner of the house. Kevin was mentioned, but his share of the estate was conditional, only if he maintained ethical behavior toward family members and did not engage in coercion. My throat tightened as I read the final line. Barbara is to remain in full possession of the family home for the duration of her life, or until she chooses otherwise. That one sentence changed everything. Lisa made several copies, filed motions, scheduled a new hearing. Kevin tried to respond, with a motion to invalidate the old will, calling it irrelevant. His attorney argued that Richard had verbally changed his wishes before passing, and that the newer will, conveniently lacking proper witnesses, should take precedence. But Lisa didn't back down. She had bank records showing Richard made home, repairs in my name just weeks before his death. She had my documented payments. She had copies of Richard's messages to a financial planner, requesting I be added to the trust. Kevin didn't know we had those emails. Lisa smiled when she printed them out. This is enough to bury him. The night before the first hearing, I couldn't sleep. I sat alone at the table in the laundromat apartment, staring at the only photo I had left from the house. Me and Richard, taken on our anniversary. We were laughing. He had his hand on mine. How had it come to this? I didn't want revenge. I just wanted what was mine, what Richard wanted me to have. But somewhere deep inside me, I realized something else too. Kevin hadn't just taken the house. He'd erased me, and that, more than anything, was the part I wasn't going to let stand. The courtroom wasn't grand, just a square room with pale walls and wooden benches that creaked when you shifted. Kevin sat across from me, dressed in a dark blazer. Julie wasn't with him. His expression was unreadable, tight jaw, narrowed eyes. He didn't look at me. I didn't look away. The judge entered. Kevin's attorney began with a list of reasons why the older will no longer represented Mr. Whitaker's intent. He used words like hearsay, uncertainty, mental decline. The rest of the family didn't pick up. Kevin must have spread whatever version of events suited him best. One night, I called the lawyer Richard and I used for our taxes. He was retired now, but still answered his phone. "Barbara?" he said. "I haven't heard from you in years." I explained what happened. He went quiet. "Barbara, did you ever sign a durable power of attorney?" I don't think so. Not recently," he sighed. "Kevin filed a new will, but I know for a fact Richard came in last year and made changes in your favor. He wanted to protect you in case something happened." My stomach dropped. "So, there's another will?" "There should be. I witnessed it myself. Kevin must have suppressed it." I hung up. My hands were trembling. Everything I'd feared was true. Kevin had pushed me out on purpose, stolen my home, and erased me from my own husband's final wishes. But that night, something shifted in me. I stopped crying. I stopped hoping that maybe Kevin would change, that maybe Julie would come around. I sat at that small table in the laundromat apartment and wrote down every single date, transaction, and detail I could remember from the past 6 months. Then I called an attorney, someone who didn't know Kevin, someone with a reputation for being difficult. Her name was Lisa Klein, and when I met her the next morning, she looked me straight in the eye and said, "If they forged anything, we'll find it, and if they stole from you, they're going to wish they hadn't." For the first time in weeks, I exhaled. This wasn't just about a house. It was about what they thought they could do to me and get away with. And I was going to make sure they didn't. Lisa Klein didn't offer sympathy. That was the first thing I noticed about her. She wasn't one of those attorneys who patted your hand and said, "We'll take care of it, sweetie." She was blunt, organized, and already flipping through her yellow legal pad by the time I finished my coffee. "Here's what I need," she said without looking up. "Every document you've ever signed related to the house. Mortgage statements, joint tax returns, any power of attorney your husband ever mentioned. If Kevin submitted a will that cuts you out, we'll find the inconsistencies. But I can't fight what I can't see." I nodded, sliding over a stack of folders I had brought from the safety deposit box I'd opened years earlier. Something Richard had always laughed about. Paranoid, he called it once. I used to wonder if it was pointless. Now it was saving me. Lisa flipped through them quickly. "Okay, these tax documents are gold. We can prove you've been paying property taxes. And this right here," she held up a bank statement. "This shows your personal account was used for maintenance on the home. New roof, water heater, foundation repairs. That's contribution to the asset. It matters." I leaned forward. "But if Kevin already filed a new will—" "We're not going to fight his will," she interrupted. "We're going to bring back the real one." According to Lisa, the previous will, made just 8 months before Richard passed, was likely drafted by their office but never filed because Kevin rushed the paperwork through while I was still in shock from the funeral. He probably presented it as the latest version and told the court there were no other revisions. Lisa leaned back in her chair. "We'll subpoena Richard's estate attorney. If that document exists and he witnessed it, we'll get it into court." I swallowed hard. And what if Kevin destroyed it? She looked at me flatly. "Then we prove motive, fraud, possibly elder abuse." I left her office with a mix of adrenaline and nausea. That same evening, I returned to the apartment above, the laundromat, and reviewed every piece of mail I'd collected over the past year. Bank letters, HOA notices, health insurance receipts, anything that tied me to the house or showed I had still been involved in its upkeep. Every bill I paid that Kevin and Julie never even noticed, because I had always just handled things. By the end of the night, my dining table was covered in paper. The weight of it was both overwhelming and oddly comforting. My life reduced to dates, transactions, receipts, and signatures. The next morning, Lisa called. Her voice was sharper than usual. "Barbara, we've got a problem." My chest tightened. "What is it?" "The estate attorney Richard used, Mark Sampson, is refusing to cooperate."